So let's start off with when to tender. It seems pretty obvious that you know when to tender a property claim. You know, if there's no property damage, there's no property claim. But it's a lot less clear when it comes to liability claims. So David, when do you recommend notifying the carrier about a potential liability claim?
Well, we're going to talk about it probably more as we get into this.
Absolutely.
But I've seen associations denied coverage because they didn't tender the claim timely. And so I'd say tender as soon as possible. Don't be worried about the increase in insurance rates. I'm sure you guys will talk about what that means. At least put the carrier on notice that you have potential claims. Somebody says they're going to sue. I have associations that have lost coverage because they thought that the homeowner was never going to sue, and then they do sue years later, and then boom, they have no coverage. So
now, but there's a difference between a verbal accusation. You know, somebody just says, "I'm going to sue you." Do you call your broker right away, or do you want something in written form?
I don't think it has to be written. That definitely not written. I think the board, if they need to talk about it, see what's going on. I think the first time someone says that, you can let it go and watch what happens. But if you have a persistent problem with a homeowner, there's some homeowners that I can think of two situations now where associations have denied coverage because they had ongoing issues with a homeowner who threatened to sue, and they said he's never going to sue, and then he or she sues, and then the carrier says, hey, you didn't tell us 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and there's no coverage.
I think it's safe to say, though, a written demand for damages, it's going to constitute a claim, whether it's an email or a piece of correspondence or even the minutes of a board meeting.
Absolutely.
That acknowledges that there's an upset homeowner and is making certain accusations and threats. I think that is the time where the board is really obligated to put the carrier on notice. It doesn't mean it's going to become a claim, but at least let the carrier know that this accusation has been made.
Right. And it can be just an accusation. It doesn't have to be a demand for something.
I think that the interesting thing is that, particularly in California, you can sue for any reason. There doesn't have to be a justification necessarily. They feel like they've been wrong. They put it in writing. We have an obligation to respond.
Yeah. With that in mind, I'm just kind of curious, David, in your experience, what are some things that get in the way of that sort of, sooner tender rather than later tender to the carrier? Things like, are there people who just assume it's not going to become anything and sort of dismiss it until it is a problem? Or in your experience, what are some of the things that get in the way of that?
Well, there are people in California, people sue at the drop of a hat. It costs $500 to file a lawsuit, and you don't have to prove your case up initially. And people are very prone in California, especially as Tim alluded to saying, I'm going to sue you. Just, there's so many lawyers, and they just do it. And so people tend to think, they're bluffing. They're not going to sue. It's BS. And there's been some instances where that's true, but often there's instances where it's not true, and they do sue, and then you're stuck.